Welcome to the show and welcome to Glow So Bright. When looking for an AR-15, especially if you find one that is used, it is incredibly dizzying and confusing to figure out what you should get. With so many different brands, with different features, barrel lengths, configurations, all sorts of different stuff, it is quite difficult to figure out what to get for an AR-15, especially if you come across a used one. Well, you can get a new rifle, and if you do get a defect on that, you may be able to go and send it back. But other times, if you go look for one, especially used in person, for example, at the used section of a gun store, at a pawn shop, or a gun show, it might be difficult to figure out what is an appropriate AR-15 to buy and to judge on its configuration and condition. What is even more difficult is if the trigger is disabled or if you're not allowed to fire it. So I will teach you how to look for in an AR-15 and what sort of features or deficiencies to look for before you buy one, so you can buy one that is more likely to be the right one for you. Now, with so many different configurations out there, for example, you have 10-inch AR-15 pistols that have a free-floated handguard, all the way to your common carbine that has a 16-inch barrel and a telescopic stock, all the way to full-length rifles with a 20-inch long barrel and integrated carry handle upper receiver. I mean, you have other things that have two rifles that at a glance look pretty identical in configuration, barrel length, and features, but one would be good and one would not be. So it's incredibly difficult to figure out what to get, especially if you're new to this. So as my own guide, I'll give you some pointers on what to look out for. And while you can use military manuals on disassembly and function of the M4, the M16, or civilian instructions on the AR-15 semi-automatic rifle or a firearm, that can only get you so far. With so many different configurations out there laid out on the table, a military manual may not be applicable to maybe what you have over here. However, it is extremely useful for knowing how to disassemble one of these rifles or very bare components that are universal or very, very similar to each other, and what sort of defects and deficiencies to look out for. So, let's get started. Now, if whoever is trying to sell the firearm to you refuses to let you open it, then don't get that firearm at all. Avoid that. One to take a look out for in a rifle is if the lower receiver is made out of forged aluminum. I don't like billet lower receivers. Some of them can be good. I prefer not to have them. I prefer to have a standard forged lower receiver. Another thing to look out for is polymer receivers are something that should be avoided. The only exception to that would be the G-Wax lower or the KE Arms lower found on the What Would Stoner Do rifle. Those lowers are of decent construction, but avoid polymer lower receivers. One thing to look out for would be the overall configuration of one of these rifles. For example, you have an AR-15 pistol over here with a barrel length less than that of 16 inches. You have ourselves our rifle over here. This one has a full 16 inches over here with a removable muzzle device. However, this is considered to be a rifle in the United States. Now, what would be a problem is if you have or come across a firearm, for example, this sort of AR-15 pistol over here, but instead of having a bare extension tube, this one has a brace on it. This is an arm brace. This is not a stock. This is a valid thing to have on an AR-15 pistol with a barrel length less than that of 16 inches. However, if the brace is also not present, it's just an empty tube, that's also acceptable. Or if you have a circular tube, that is also fine as well. However, what would be a problem is if you have something just like this with a barrel length less than that of 16 inches. This example has 10 inches with a collapsing or telescopic stock like this. This is a problem, and that if you have a firearm in that sort of configuration, you will need to register that with the ATF to comply with the National Firearms Act. And if you don't do that, you may be subject to a fine of greater than $250,000 and a prison sentence of 10 years. So don't get yourself in trouble over that sort of stuff. You see over here, we have this rifle over here. A 14.7-inch barrel. We have a standard buttstock on it. This is totally fine, and this is considered as a rifle. However, the one thing that this rifle has to make it compliant is we have a muzzle device that is affixed using a pin and weld. So the muzzle device is permanently attached to the barrel, giving it an overall length of 16 inches, which makes this compliant. That's one thing to be careful to look out for when purchasing a AR-15, especially a used one. Another thing to look out for is look at the overall rifle as a whole. If there's paint all over it, be very careful. Paint can be used to hide defects and problems, and if not painted properly, paint can enter the components of the firearm and cause malfunctions. For example, if paint gets into the trigger, the fire control group mechanism, it can cause serious impedance and malfunctions. If it gets into the pins, it makes it difficult to remove and disassemble the rifle for inspection and cleaning. Paint getting into the magazine well would make the magazines not drop free or feed properly. Be very careful with rifles that have a custom paint job or Duracoat or Cerakote job. Another thing to look out for is, unless it's in a factory configured configuration where out of the factory, if you buy this firearm new and it comes with accessories on it, aftermarket accessories, for example, on this upper receiver group over here, do not add value to the firearm. Most of these are frankly junk, poor quality, made in China, often counterfeit. Ignore that. Don't count these as part of a contributing factor to the value of the firearm. And some retailers would use these sorts of cheap accessories to mark up the value of the firearm. So some sucker would buy it and think that they have all the features, bells and whistles and doodads enough to arm a militia somewhere in Southern Africa. But don't fall for that sort of trap. Another thing to look out for on a whole is that if there's bright anodized parts that on the controls, for example, a bright red charging handle, a forward assist, fire selector, magazine release, stay away. That is poor quality. Those are poor quality parts, a poor quality rifle, and more than likely the previous owner had that rifle and didn't work, or it's completely useless and is trying to get rid of it. Avoid these sorts of pleb cringe rifles with bright anodized parts. Now that we get generalities out of the way, let's go look at very specific parts of the rifle from tip all the way to butt. Let's go take a look at a very basic configuration of rifle over here and inspect it from tip to butt. So we have ourselves our very basic Eagle Arms AR-15 carbine, a carbine with a 16-inch barrel. And you see over at the muzzle, we have ourselves our A2 birdcage muzzle device, sometimes referred to as a flash hider. Now, in all of these flash hiders, you would either need to have a crush washer present or timing shims. More than often, these crush washers would be adequate for an ordinary muzzle device or for a specialized muzzle device that is designed to accept a suppressor or silencer. That also needs to be present as well, and these timing things would make sure that the muzzle device is set properly. If we have the bottom of this A2 birdcage over here be completely closed off and starting at halfway the cuts needed, then we have ourselves a properly timed muzzle device that is properly attached. If it is missing, that is a problem. Another thing to look out for is some configurations of AR-15 out there, for example, ones that do not have a muzzle device. For example, the old AR-15A2 Colt Sporter rifles or other assault weapon ban compliant rifles more often found in, say, California, New Jersey, New York. make sure that the crown is in good operating condition and is not dinged or damaged. Having damage would have severe accuracy problems, and if the muzzle device is not properly set on the rifle, it is an indication that the previous owner has modified the rifle poorly and more than likely has not used a reaction rod to remove that sort of muzzle device, and something would get seriously messed up and damaged with the rifle. Further down the barrel, we can take a look at the caliber markings on it, as well as material and twist rate. This Eagle Arms rifle is chambered in .223 Wild. Now, on the receiver, some of these rifles would say multi-cal on it. Ignore that. These lower receivers are of a standard pattern. But over here, it says .223 Wild, which means this rifle can safely chamber and fire both 5.56 NATO ammunition and .223 Remington ammunition. That is perfectly fine. Another barrel marking to take a look out for would be one saying 5.56 NATO, like on this rifle over here with an FN barrel. 5.56 NATO can also chamber and shoot safely .223 Remington ammunition and 5.56 NATO ammunition. Now the difference between that, .223 Remington, .223 Wild, and 5.56 NATO chambering is that of the free bore and the depth of the chamber. I will not go into that in depth in this video. Another thing to take a look out for is barrel twist rate. That is important, and which sort of ammunition can be used to fire out of this rifle. For example, the bigger the number, for example, 1 in 9, 1 in 12, that is designed and to be more optimized with lighter bullets like 45 grain ammunition, 55 grain ammunition. Grains means the total weight of the bullet. For having a 1 in 8 or 1 in 7 twist barrel, it's something you should look out for in a rifle, and you can use a more wide variety of ammunition. A 1 in 7 twist barrel can still shoot 55 grain ammunition quite accurately if the barrel itself is of good construction. Yet with a 1 in 12 or 1 in 9 twist barrel, it may not use heavier bullets such as 75 grain Hornady ballistic tip match or 77 grain Mark 262 open tip match ammunition. Having a faster barrel twist, or like a smaller number, 1 in 8 or 1 in 7, means that you can fire more ammunition types through the rifle and still be stable enough in flight. There are many different varieties of gas block available. On this particular example over here, we have a pinned gas block in place, the front sight block, which is a combination of the gas block and the front sight. Now we have ourselves a flat top upper receiver over here. A flat top refers to the upper receiver having a full length Picatinny rail section for facilitation of mounting optics. This is different than that of a carry handle upper receiver. A carry handle upper receiver does not have this rail system over here and has an integrated carry handle and sighting system. We have an A1 variant over here. The A2 variant also applies for inspection. Now, one thing to keep a lookout for is on this particular gas block over here, you'll find a small F on it. F is the designation of these sorts of gas blocks for use with the upper receiver that has a Picatinny rail on it. Now, don't have a F-marked gas block mixed with a carry handle, nor have a non-F-marked gas block on a flat top upper receiver. Having that sort of mismatch would mean that the steps to properly zero these weapons will not be able to be put in place, and makes it more difficult to mechanically and properly zero these firearms. One example that is bad is we have ourselves this upper receiver over here manufactured by AR Stoner, in which we have a non-F-marked gas block with that of a flat top of a receiver, which means we'll have this sort of mismatch, and that makes it more difficult to go and zero it. Looking at the gas block itself, on these ones that have the integrated sight on it, if it's canted to the left or to the right, that is a serious problem. It leads to even more problems with this being zeroed. And for this particular example over here, the front sight base, the gas block is canted. That is not good. That should be as straight as possible. And for something like this, where it's incredibly visible with the naked eye, that is a serious problem and that should be avoided. Going down with now going down the barrel, we can take a look at our handguard assembly. It's a bit difficult to do so, but with these ones with the drop-in handguards that are not secured to place with screws or anything like that, you can go and pull back down on this ring, the slip ring called the delta ring, pull it down and separate the handguard halves together. Kind of difficult when seated like this, but you can take these handguards off the rifle and inspect the barrel. Off the rifle, we can go and inspect the barrel nut. Make sure that there are no teeth missing, make sure that the gas tube isn't damaged, make sure everything is in good working order and in good cosmetic shape. If there are any teeth missing, that is an indication of extremely poor assembly and the whole rifle should be avoided. Speaking of handguards, if the firearm in question has a free-floated rail on it, make sure that any of these parts inside the free-floated rail, like the gas block or the gas tube, do not come in contact with the rail. This would remove the free floatability and cause challenges and may cause heat to transfer over to the rail and make it a problem. Make sure that the rail itself is straight and in line with the upper receiver. Also ensure that the height of the rail, or of this top section of rail over here, is the same as on the upper receiver. If the rail is taller or shorter than that of the upper receiver, that's an indication of poor quality craftsmanship. Make sure that the rail system is in line with the upper receiver. Make sure that it's straight. Let's take a look at the controls of this. If there are anything that's broken or busted or inoperable, that is also a warning sign to look out for. And for a selector, if there is a resistance, especially like a good firm resistance, that's actually a good thing. Keep a lookout for that. For these telescopic stocks, if there's a little bit of wiggle and wobble in it, that's fine, that's normal. However, what isn't normal is if the actual tube itself wobbles and rattles. That means that it's not properly secured to the receiver. Take a look at the receiver end plate over here. Make sure that there is staking on it. This one does not have staking. That is a problem and that needs to be addressed. But staking is basically where these little holes on the castle nut over here, metal is pushed into the holes and is secured properly in place to make sure it doesn't back off when shooting. Charging handle. Make sure, for the charging handle, make sure that there is not an excessive gap in the slot where the charging handle inserts. If there is one, that means that there's a quality control issue with the upper receiver. That means like gas and propellant from shooting will go back into your eyes when shooting. That is quite bad. Pocket in this rifle is fairly clean, and if you can pull the trigger, don't have the hammer hit the receiver wall. Make sure it slowly rides forward, and seems pretty clean and normal. Now, one thing that is difficult to take a look at, especially if the trigger mechanism is blocked or even with a naked eye and it can only be apparent through shooting, some low quality AR-15s out there will have poor quality interface of the disconnector, and that means that when the trigger rides forward after the trigger is pulled back when shooting, it could discharge the firearm again. That is really bad, and that could mean that there could be an out of battery discharge, and that is a serious problem, but something that can't easily be looked at when inspecting these rifles visually. Let's take the bolt out and the charging handle out. Charging handle, make sure that there isn't any obvious damage to it. Make sure that the latch and spring is functional. And take a look at the chamber. So one thing you can take a look at is look through the rifling and see if the rifling is in good shape, and you can use that with a flashlight. Another step you should take a look at is to check if the barrel nut is properly tightened on the barrel. So what you can do is take the barrel and upper receiver, separate it from the lower receiver, remove the charging handle and bolt, and then twist. If it feels loose, that's a problem that needs to be addressed by a gunsmith. It looks pretty good, and there are no obstructions in this particular rifle. So that's good. Let's look at the chamber. Make sure that the barrel extension matches that of the upper receiver. What does that mean? Well, many upper receivers, especially newer ones, use an M4 style extension, and the barrel that is paired with this upper receiver uses an M4 style barrel extension. Older style ones, such as on rifles like this A1 rifle over here, make sure that there is not a mismatch between the upper receiver and that of the barrel extension. Keep an eye on that. When inspecting the barrel extension is to make sure that there is a smooth transition between that of the barrel extension and the upper receiver. Some poorly made examples out there would have improperly timed barrel extensions that are clocked, and that means that there'd be a very, very rough transition for feeding magazines and chambering a cartridge into the barrel. This particular example by Palmetto State Armory, if I can get it apart. Would have a clocked barrel extension, and this particular rifle has been giving me problems, so avoid that. Let's take a look at the bolt carrier group. We can check if the... Let's go check the bolt carrier group. Now we can check if the pistons and the bolt has been worn out and aged. If we have our bolt be fully extended, then rest it under its own weight. If it stays upright and doesn't fall down, then the bolt carrier group is still pretty good in terms of wear of the piston rings. Another thing to take a look at is staking of the gas key to the bolt carrier body. On this particular example over here, it's good. Another thing, if you can, is disassemble the whole bolt carrier and inspect each part to make sure there is no deformed, peened, blunted, corroded, or damaged parts inside. That can be found with like DA pamphlet 75030, as well as other operator books on the M16, the M4, and AR-15 rifles. Now let's take a look at this AR stoner up over here of what is not good. So let's take this apart. We have staking done on the upper part of this bolt carrier group. The staking itself is ineffective and it doesn't go anywhere, which means that the screws holding the gas key in place could back out, which could lead to serious reliability problems and severe gas leakage. So that is a problem. So what have you learned here today? Even without firing the AR-15 firearm, you can still inspect it for any sort of deficiencies, whether the rifle is in a lawful configuration, whether the parts are of decent quality and manufacture, and make sure that they're properly assembled. something like this, where the only deficiency I've noticed is that the receiver end plate is not staked. That is a pretty minor thing, and that can easily be fixed. But for other things such as improper staking of internal parts, improperly aligned gas block, poorly manufactured parts, and others, or things such as paint that would cover up any sort of potential problems, horrible red anodized parts, horrible accessories, and other things that can cause problems, those should be avoided altogether, and trying to do anything to them, like such as replacement of parts, rebuilding them at a gunsmith, is not an economically viable option, and those should be avoided. But for something like this, if I were looking for a used AR-15, this is great. If you do enjoy this video, give it a like, comment down below what you think. If you don't like the video, give it a dislike, read the video description, and if you want to see more content just like this in the future, go and subscribe. Guys, thank you very much for reaching me over 500. More content will come soon. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for your patronage. This video on inspecting an AR-15 visually before purchase is brought to you by Glow So Bright. Thank you very much.